On May 20th, 1999, South Australian police officers forced their way into an abandoned stone bank building in a tiny rural town called Snowtown, 145 kilometres north of Adelaide. They had been led there by a missing persons investigation. What they found behind the vault door was not what any of them had prepared for. 6 large plastic barrels, completely filled with commercial-grade hydrochloric acid. And inside those barrels, the dissolved, partially preserved remains of 8 human beings. The acid had been intended to destroy all evidence. Instead, it had done the opposite. The concentrated chemical environment had saponified the body fat and mummified the muscle tissue, preserving facial features, tattoos, and physical evidence in extraordinary detail. The room around those barrels told the rest of the story. Coils of rope, a heavy duct tape, blood-stained hand saws, surgical gloves, and a variac metallurgy machine, a device used to deliver precise, controlled electric current to a human body. Not to kill, to keep the victim conscious, to make sure they did not pass out from the pain. This was not a crime scene. This was a factory, and it had been operating for 7 years. Adelaide, South Australia, has long been known as the City of Churches, a description that captures its conservative, orderly, quietly religious character. It is a place of broad streets, heritage architecture, and the kind of unhurried pace that makes it feel removed from the intensity of Sydney or Melbourne. In the 1990s, Adelaide's northern suburbs told a different story. Places like Salisbury North were working-class communities built around the iron and automotive industries, communities that absorbed the economic shocks of the late 1980s, recession harder than most. Unemployment rose, services contracted, families fractured, and in that specific environment, isolated, economically exhausted, and largely invisible to the institutions that might have protected its most vulnerable members. A man named John Justin Bunting had been quietly building something for 7 years. He had built a cult, and the currency of that cult was murder. John Justin Bunting was born in Adelaide, Queensland, in 1966. He was, to those who knew him casually, charismatic, charming in the way that certain dangerous people learn to be charming, as a tool rather than a genuine quality. From childhood, he displayed a pattern that forensic psychiatrists would later map in precise clinical detail. He burned insects in acid for amusement. As a teenager, he identified as a neo-Nazi. He worked at a slaughterhouse and told co-workers that killing animals was the part of the job he enjoyed most. By the time he settled in Salisbury North in the early 1990s, he had developed an obsession that would become the ideological engine of everything that followed. He hated homosexuals. He hated what he called pedophiles, a category he applied loosely, based on neighborhood gossip, personal grudges, and pure invention. And he had begun building what investigators would later call the rock spider wall. In a hidden room of his home, Bunting constructed an elaborate network of paper notes, pushpins, and colored wool, a map of everyone in the local area he had decided deserved to die. He called them rock spiders. He called them social garbage. And one by one, he began to act on the list. Every cult requires followers. Bunting was skilled at identifying and cultivating people who could be shaped. Robert Wagner came first, a quiet, physically powerful man who became entirely submissive to Bunting's dominant intellect, progressing from a neighbor to an active participant in murder. Then came the most disturbing relationship of the entire case. Bunting entered into a relationship with a woman named Elizabeth Harvey, whose teenage son James Vlasakis became, in Bunting's hands, something between an adopted son and a weapon. Bunting assumed a father figure role over the boy, grooming him gradually, introducing him to the ideology first, then to the violence, then finally convincing him to assist in the torture and killing of his own half-brothers. Outside the inner circle was a support network. Mark Haydon, who used aliases to rent vehicles, and the Snowtown bank vault. Jody Elliott, Harvey's sister, who was so infatuated with Bunting that she used vocal disguise and impersonation to call government offices and pretend to be dead victims, ensuring their Social Security payments kept flowing into the group's accounts. This was not disorganized violence. This was a structured criminal enterprise with an ideological justification, a hierarchy of participants, and an administrative function designed to profit from the deaths of the most vulnerable people it could find. The first murder was August 1992. Clinton Trezise was 22 years old. He walked into Bunting's home for a social visit. Bunting had arbitrarily decided he was a pedophile. He bludgeoned him to death with a shovel in the living room. 2 years later, when an episode of Australia's Most Wanted featured the still unsolved case, Bunting sat and watched it with James Vlasakis and said, calmly, proudly, "That's my handiwork." The murders that followed were not the impulsive violence of the first. They became progressively more organized, more sadistic, and more ritualistic. Ray Davies was intellectually disabled. He was bound, placed in a bathtub, beaten with clubs, had a toe crushed with pliers, and was garroted with rope and a tire lever. He was buried in Bunting's backyard. Michael Gardner was 19 years old and openly gay, targeted purely for that reason. Barry Lane, who had been in a relationship with Wagner since Wagner was 13 years old, was tortured before execution, his toes crushed with pliers, then stuffed into the same barrel as Gardner. To close the barrel lid, the group amputated one of Gardner's feet. Thomas Trevelyan was 18, paranoid schizophrenic, and had helped the group in a previous killing. When Bunting decided he was becoming a liability, they drove him to Kersbrook, placed a noose around his neck, stood him on a box, and kicked it away. Local police initially ruled it a suicide. Gavin Porter was a heroin addict living with the gang. Bunting pricked his finger on a discarded syringe Porter had left on the sofa. He labeled Porter a waste. That night, Bunting and Wagner crept into the driveway and strangled Porter in his sleep in his car. The trial would later reveal the full extent of what happened to Frederick Brooks, 18 years old, intellectually disabled, the son of Jody Elliott. The group subjected him to electric shocks to his genitals. They pushed a burning sparkler into his urethra. They burned his ears and nose with cigarettes and left him to slowly choke on his gag. Throughout all of this, throughout years of murders across multiple locations in Adelaide's northern suburbs, John Bunting played one album. The 1994 alternative rock record Throwing Copper by the band Live. On continuous loop, to drown out the screaming. The last victim was David Johnson, 24 years old, James Vlasakis' half-brother. On May 9, 1999, the group lured Johnson to the abandoned bank building at Snowtown under the pretense of helping him buy a cheap computer. The moment Johnson entered the building, Wagner choked him from behind and handcuffed him to a bath. He was forced to read a pre-written script into a recording device, confessing to crimes he had never committed, reciting his bank account PIN numbers. Wagner and Vlasakis left to find an ATM. When they returned, Johnson was dead. Bunting had killed him alone in the vault. What happened next was documented in evidence at trial and confirmed in sentencing proceedings. Bunting and Wagner cooked and consumed a portion of David Johnson's flesh. It was the final act of a killing spree that had lasted 7 years and claimed 12 lives. 11 days later, police raided the vault. The entire operation collapsed because of one person who refused to accept a simple explanation. Elizabeth Haydon, wife of accomplice Mark Haydon, had been killed by Bunting and Wagner in her own home while her husband deliberately left the house to clear the way. Mark Haydon later returned to help pack his wife's body into a barrel. When Elizabeth's brother, Garion Sinclair, noticed that his sister had suddenly and completely vanished, abandoning 2 young children with no explanation, he refused to believe Mark Haydon's contradictory stories. Sinclair went to the police. Investigators noticed that Elizabeth's disappearance was connected to a network of other missing persons cases going back years. They obtained permission to plant listening devices inside Haydon's home. The recordings captured conversations about moving hidden items. Investigators traced the movement of barrels from a backyard in Salisbury North to a shed in Murray Bridge to vehicles at Hoyleton, and finally to the rented vault at Snowtown. The small-town environment of Snowtown itself sealed the group's fate. When strange vehicles began arriving late at night to load heavy objects in and out of the old stone bank building, locals noticed immediately. In a small rural community where everyone knows every car, strangers carrying barrels after midnight stand out. Locals called the police. The raid happened on May 20th, 1999. 3 of the 4 men convicted were arrested the following day. The Supreme Court trial began on October 14, 2002, and became one of the longest and most expensive criminal proceedings in South Australian history. The evidence was so psychologically devastating that 3 separate jurors suffered severe trauma and had to be removed from the panel. Audio recordings of the torture sessions were played in court. On September 8, 2003, Justice Brian Martin handed down his verdict. John Bunting received 11 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. Robert Wagner received 10. Justice Martin declared that both men were, in his exact words, in the business of killing for pleasure and entirely incapable of true rehabilitation. James Vlasakis, who had cooperated with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to 4 murders, received a minimum non-parole period of 26 years. In August 2025, Vlasakis was granted parole. Then the decision was immediately overturned on review. He remains in prison today. John Bunting and Robert Wagner remain in maximum security, serving consecutive life sentences with no path to release. None of the killers lived in Snowtown. None of the victims lived there. Only one of the 12 murders actually took place inside the town. But because that is where the barrels were found, Snowtown became the name the world remembered. The community debated for years whether to legally rename itself Rosetown, to erase the association with Bunting's crimes and give the residents their own identity back. The debate continues. The Stone Bank building still stands. True crime tourists still arrive. And in a town of a few hundred people who had nothing to do with any of it, the bodies in the barrels became their permanent inheritance. John Bunting did not think of himself as a monster. He thought of himself as a solution. A man doing what the authorities would not do, removing people from the world who he had decided had no right to be in it. Forensic psychiatrists who examined him in detail concluded something different. They found a man who used ideology the way a painter uses a canvas, not because he believed in the picture, but because he needed somewhere to put what was already inside him. The victims of the Snowtown murders were not social garbage. They were people vulnerable, often isolated, often failed by the same systems that should have protected them long before John Bunting found them. Their names were Clinton, Ray, Michael, Barry, Thomas, Gavin, Troy, Frederick, Gary, Elizabeth, David, and Susan. Say them. Remember them. Because John Bunting spent 7 years trying to make sure that nobody would.